IT Pro TV, an easy, entertaining approach to online IT training. Stream over 2,000 hours of up-to-date, high-quality video content live and on demand. For a free 7-day trial and for a limited time, get 50% off a monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. Visit itpro.tv/enterprise security and use the code ES50. LogRhythm's Netmon Freemium delivers real-time network visibility to quickly identify emerging threats in your IT environment. Netmon Freemium is a free commercial-grade network forensics and traffic analytics solution. You can use Netmon Freemium's powerful capabilities to search against all observed network traffic, identify abnormal traffic patterns and application usage, and quickly analyze full packet captures. Take the first step towards real-time network visibility. Visit logRhythm.com/freemium to learn more and download it today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. My teleprompter's broken, but I'm going to try and do the ad for itpro.tv. ITIL Managing the Lifecycle and Microsoft Hello for Business are some of their new course offerings. And, of course, your subscription gets you access to all the Q&A forums and all of their fabulous videos. It's $85.70 per month or $857 per year. However, we've got a 50% off code that's going to help you save 50% off for the lifetime of your subscription, which you just heard in the ad, the discount code ES50 if you go to itpro.tv/enterprise security. Check out our fine friends over at itpro.tv. How about that? I think I covered it. I think I did it.
How about that?
How about that? So, building a bug bounty program. I've actually talked about this in one of my talks with relation to IoT security, which I thought I was going to not present on anymore, and then shit got real again, and I had to talk about it again. And there are actually several IoT-based companies that have built bug bounty programs. And I think that's encouraging. I think some of it stems from regulatory bodies in the U.S. government, in any case, that are coming down on some of these IoT companies. In fact, ASUS and D-Link have been sued by the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. And subsequently, we've seen them, at least ASUS, I believe, adopt a bug bounty program. Or maybe it was D-Link. It was D-Link, actually, that did that. ASUS settled out of court, and D-Link is still in negotiations, and their claim on their website is they're going to fight it. So since none of it has been to court, there's no legal precedent, so we'll see what happens. However, it means that I think more IoT companies are seeing this going, well, I want to reduce my risk of getting sued by the FTC, which could be costly. Mm-hmm. ASUS has to undergo a lot of audits, which I don't have a lot of details on, which is kind of interesting. But I think the companies are saying they would rather have a bug bounty program and show regulatory, but hey, we actually care about security. We have a bug bounty program. Fix some of that stuff, make security better, because it's a lower cost. So,
but they're so screwed though. And the reason why they're in so much trouble is because they don't have a lot of ways of getting out patches. Their attack surface for legacy applications and devices is so massive that seriously, we could sit down, the three of us, in an afternoon, have a bunch of these Internet of Things or edge router devices, home networking devices, and probably find 10, 15 vulnerabilities an hour. And if you're paying out a $500 to $1,000 fee for every single vulnerability that's discovered, that's going to get expensive really, really quick. So I feel bad for a lot of those vendors. Maybe not all that bad, but I do feel bad because they're in a really difficult situation, especially if they start moving towards bug bounty programs.
So here's the other interesting thing. In Josh Corman's keynote, he was talking about CVE, and there were people that I know that work for MITRE in the audience. He prepped them beforehand, thankfully. But he said, look, there are 50,000 something CVEs out there today. And that's about 80% of the coverage of all the vulnerabilities that exist today. So while CVE has a significant number, that in and of itself is only 80%. If you look at your average IoT device, it might have 1,000 vulnerabilities, 1,000 missing CVEs on it, and that's not inclusive. So we've got a huge problem with CVE. Now, what I've noticed a trend is vendors will have a bug bounty program. However, they're not even looking at the CVEs that already exist inside of their products. And what's interesting is there are vendors that can help you with that problem. And open source is particularly bad in a lot of respects, right? There's a lot of code with a lot of existing CVEs inside of the open source software. There's also a lot of bugs we don't know about in open source software. Many of these IoT manufacturers are using open source software. So this just is like creating a perfect storm that we've seen with Mirai and then the Breaker bot and Hajim and all these botnets running around on these IoT devices. And I think it's going to get worse. However, I've seen, so I hate to pick on Ubiquiti because I love their products. However, they have a bug bounty program. I believe they do have a bug bounty program, but they had a PHP server in one of their products from like 1999. And I'm like, dude, why are you paying out bug bounties when you can just go fix that stuff yourself and it's going to be way less expensive? And by the way, then you don't have this PR problem that you had when this was exposed to the world. So thoughts on that? I mean, I think companies should do a bug bounty program, but I think it goes to our previous conversation. Get your house in order first.
Yeah, get your house in order. And we talk to a lot of our customers, and this sounds weird. Whenever we talk to customers, we say they should get a bug bounty program, and we kind of shepherd them towards Katie as much as possible, or BugCrowd, or any of these different bug bounty programs that are out there. But it's basically you do want to hire somebody, or at least have your team go through and try to get that low-hanging fruit off as quickly as possible. And did you guys see Jeremiah Grossman's tweets on this yesterday?
No.
He had some interesting tweets. He said that if you're in pen testing and you believe that bug bounty programs are not a threat, then you're about to be rudely awakened. And I agree with him. And kind of the gist, he had like 5 tweets all tied together. At that point, it should just be a blog post, but at any rate. At the end of it, he said the reason why bug bounty programs are going to kill so many pen testing companies is because people cannot fundamentally tell the difference between a pen test and a vulnerability assessment. And realistically, bug bounty programs are going to come in and they're going to clean up against vulnerability assessments. Good penetration testing firms, they're going to continue to do just fine. At least I think that they are. But I think that the bug bounty programs are going to come in and they're really going to start taking that low-hanging fruit. And to be honest, we've seen some reports from some bug bounty portals they just have some fantastic testers and researchers. There's some really cool stuff that they discover, but you have to get that low-hanging fruit off, or else you're going to have thousands of vulnerabilities that you're going to be paying 100 to 500, or maybe you're going to be spending thousands of dollars on T-shirts that you send to the attackers that find this. By the way, don't ever do a bug bounty program where you pay out T-shirts. That's just poor form.
Yeah, I think that's one of the some suggestions I have for people is make sure you compensate well. Also, I think the commonality between bug bounties and pen testing is, and John, you're going to love this, not to tie the hands of your bug bounty program or your pen tester, but also keep in mind the differences between a bug bounty program and a penetration tester and set the appropriate level of restrictions on each of them.
See, now that's an interesting thought. I do find it interesting. We have customers, whenever we come into a pen test, they have all of these restrictions on when they will allow us and not allow us to test, what it is we are or not allowed to do. And they have bug bounty programs. And we say, do you have the same restrictions on your bug bounty programs? And then they get like, well, no. And like you said, tying the hands is something that we see quite often.
Yeah. Michael, thoughts on that? Like the economic model behind it, right? Like you have a bug bounty program and you're limiting it in multiple different ways, right?
Well, lest we not start with my favorite question, let's jump for a second. What I've always been enamored with is it's basically on-spec testing, right? So instead of having to have a set of testers and a disciplined rigor myself, I basically go, I did my best. And I throw it out to the marketplace, and I'm basically expecting somebody else to take on the work on spec. And if they find something, then I give them some sort of reward for it. And economically, that's an interesting way, right? I mean, I've shifted the model, and I've always thought from an economics perspective that's really kind of fascinating. I think from a marketplace perspective, it's riddled with disinformation and misinformation and confusion, and it'll sort itself out. How fast? Don't know. But that's the thing. Like even listening to you guys talk, like I find it's fascinating because there's a number of people. If you say it's pen test, they go, "Oh yeah, pen test," and then a guy like me comes along and says, "Cool, what's that mean?" Well, pen test. Nope, I don't know what that means. Go ahead, explain it to me. And I think bug bounty is the same way. And I think that the pros and the cons to it are it's getting a lot of attention right now. But I think about, so you're a security person listening to this right now in your enterprise going, oh, well, how do I get that? How are you going to get that? How are you going to go explain that? And then how are you going to integrate that into your current organization today? And how do people see that as a net positive versus not? So, I mean, let's go simple. What's the value prop of a bug bounty program to the enterprise?
Well, let's back up, because there's two separate things, right? Whenever you're talking about the value proposition for a bug bounty program, there's two things. One, it's what many organizations perceive a bug bounty program is going to do for them, and what a bug bounty can actually do for the organization are oftentimes two completely different things.
Agreed.
Unfortunately, many organizations look at vulnerabilities as an Easter egg hunt. The idea is if we unleash hundreds of hackers on the outside of our environment, they're going to find all of the vulnerabilities and we won't be vulnerable anymore. That's wrong. That's not the way you should be looking at things. But rather, much like a pen test has the exact same types of issues, and I think that goes to the maturity that you were talking about just 2 seconds ago. It's going to sort itself out eventually. But I'm seeing bug bounty programs going through the same type of problems as far as how people visualize them in their head that we had with pen testing 5-6 years ago. However, if you look at bug bounty programs, and to some extent a penetration test should be put into this as well, to help find systemic issues underneath your architecture and how you're actually doing things from a policy, process, and procedure level, and trying to find holes in that policy, process, procedure stack, then you're thinking about it correctly. Unfortunately, many people are just buying it and saying, we're going to have a whole bunch of hackers comb over our organization, find all these vulnerabilities, and then we won't have any more. And that's just not true.
I like that. I like that a lot, because I think a lot of companies get it wrong, and I think it's a 3-step process that we've really identified here, and there's value in each step. And I think people rush to, well, I'm just going to have a bug bounty program, and all my vulnerabilities and exposures, well, they're taken care of because I have a bug bounty program. But keep in mind, we have already established you have to look at your own vulnerabilities yourself and weed things out. Then you need a penetration testing firm to dig into your processes and have a trusted advisor that works with you side by side, and then have a bug bounty program to get into everything else that might have been missed in the first 2 steps. And I think that's the process that people need to consider, and structure each of those programs so there's no overlap or gaps in between them.
I like that. What's great about that too is that you answered one of my other questions, which is right. I call it readiness, right? But okay, so I say I want it. What do I have to do to be ready? You just gave people 3 steps. I love it. I thoroughly like it. So how do you measure the success of a bug bounty program?
Yeah, it's kind of like,
I think
hey, if we paid out a lot of bug bounties, is that success? Like, costing us money is success.
I think you'd be looking for the trend. Let's say you paid out $1,000 a week for a bug bounty program 2 months ago, and now all of a sudden you're paying a few hundred, I would consider that to be success, because there's fewer and fewer vulnerabilities coming back. But that's still getting into that trap of saying we don't have any vulnerabilities because there's fewer of them actually being discovered on the outside of our environment. I would say a successful bug bounty program is whenever you find a vulnerability that makes you rethink, or the bug bounty program finds a vulnerability that makes you rethink your IT security architecture and your processes, your patch management, your vulnerability assessment, your overall IT architecture for your firewalls. If you have something that makes you sit down and really think hard about how you can systematically address these issues across your entire environment, then that's a successful bug bounty program. But notice that that's active. That's not something that somebody is doing for you. It's illuminating the issue that you now need to put the effort into to try to fix it, but it's not going to fix it for you.
I also think that a good measurement in place for bug bounty program is to reduce the time it takes to respond and remediate an issue. And that in the beginning could be kind of high, but I think that also speaks to Michael's question about readiness. If you don't have a plan or a process in place to remediate those vulnerabilities as quickly as possible, then that time to fix is going to be really long in the beginning, and you hope that over time it shortens it, right, over time. And
that's just going to happen with practice, right?
Yeah, and I think LastPass for me is a really good example. I'm not sure if they have a bug bounty program or not, but there have been vulnerabilities that have been disclosed in LastPass, and to my knowledge, they've fixed them all very, very quickly. Their response is excellent. However, it's somewhat of not of a great measure when we look at GM that took 5 years to fix a vulnerability in their systems. However, that was like a major restructuring. And to speak to John's point, like that made them rethink the entire implementation that they had with OnStar and all of those things. And it really did take them 5 years. So while there are measurements in certain circumstances, it may not be a good measurement.
And to kind of tie it around to the very beginning of how you started this, you were talking about a lot of these IoT vendors out there and the trouble that they have with these bug bounty programs. And I would say that the measure of success that we can have in this industry is if we start seeing cleaner IoT devices hitting the marketplace, that means it's being successful. But if they're looking at bug bounty programs to be their security testing suite and they're not going to do their internal testing before it actually gets there, then it's failed completely.
You know what? I like that too, because now we're looking at micro and macro. I really like that macro view. If we see better stuff in aggregate in the industry, that's a really good sign overall. That's awesome. I really like that. What I keep looking at too is it's that integration point. So we keep acknowledging, well, you've got to be mature to it. But this is more anecdotal. A concern I have, those people, as you said, John, they go, well, I've got a bug bounty program. We're good. And, they ring the bell and they paid their money and they go. But then I look and I said, well, how did you integrate that, right? How do you triage those when they come in? How do you prioritize that risk? And I think that's one of the things our industry gets really frustrated on, because we look at it and say, well, based on what I see, that's an easy fix. But they don't know what it's like on the other side of that equation. They don't know what their capitalization is or isn't like, what other risks they're dealing with and where it fits in it. And we get frustrated sometimes that people don't move at the speed that we want them to. And so what I always look at is, if you opened up a bug bounty, but you don't have a mechanism in place to be able to triage, to be able to react to it, to be able to update stuff, to be able to communicate that properly and handle those relationships, I feel like you're just opening up the floodgates to just keep taking a pounding and without a break. Have we seen that happen, like where people do a bug bounty and then they throw their hands up a couple months later and say, okay, we weren't ready for this?
No, usually the reason why people get frustrated with bug bounty programs and go away is because they have a bad experience with a researcher on the other side of the bug bounty program. In bug bounty programs, some of the people that are involved in doing the testing, we'll call them researchers, are fantastic. They're professional. They're geniuses. But other people, they kind of fit the mold of the stereotypical hacker. So most of the time, whenever people get frustrated, it's because they're not getting clean information out of their bug bounty program or from the researcher that they're dealing with. Or in some situations, unfortunately, personal threats start flying around, and that ends things pretty quickly.
I have a great example of that, and Signal Open Whisper Systems, who we talked about on the show, and I had to make an update with new information on this story. There were researchers that presented at a conference and said basically Signal is broken, and we found a lot of vulnerabilities in it. Now, if you back up a little bit, Signal didn't do Open Whisper didn't do a bug bounty program. However, they hired an independent firm to evaluate the security of their software and protocols, and as far as I can tell, passed with flying colors. Now, this other research team, not in a bug bounty, just said you have issues. Moxie Marlinspike looked into the issue, communicated with us, and communicated back to the reporting party and said, basically, look, our software is secure. And what the researchers are pointing out is that because of the environments where our software is installed, there are security shortcomings. It has nothing to do with the security of Signal itself, but because it runs on things like Android, that, you can do certain things, but that's because of the environment, is essentially what that boiled down to. Now, in Moxie's defense, in Signal and Open Whisper Systems' defense, when I interviewed Phil Zimmerman, I asked Phil about Signal, and he's like, dude, it's awesome. And so, if that isn't validation, and not that's just another extra layer of validation that the dude that created PGP and is focused on these problems of communication and encryption since the beginning of his career has just validated your software, and in fact was the basis for some of the things that Phil did with voice over IP security and encryption. That's a resounding endorsement. And I think to bring it back to bug bounties, that's what can happen, right? You do a program, and how you set the parameters matters, and then people are coming back to you reporting issues, and you're like, well, that's not really an issue. And then, like John says, you get into this pissing match, and then you get frustrated with bug bounties and throwing hands up.
So is the answer to that, we've seen Apple and others, and there's different degrees to it. It's a closed bug bounty. It's an invite only. Yep. They vet the people who come into it. Do you guys like that strategy, or is that not really meeting the spirit of a bug bounty?
To a point. I think Apple is the worst at making the information so inaccessible that no one can make an informed decision or opinion about what's happening with the security or insecurity of Apple products. And I think they're doing a disservice to the rest of us by not saying anything about what happened. And I think there's issues that, if they had provided more information, could help the rest of us develop a threat model on that. Ask ourselves, are we vulnerable to the similar kind of thing? Or how should I evaluate the security of Apple products and use them in my environment? We don't have enough information because Apple just keeps everything locked down. And they do that because of the examples we've given with other projects and software that had a bad experience.
Well, and that also creates a situation where you've just invited the echo chamber. Mm-hmm. And if you're just inviting your friends and your friends all think and agree and believe things the way that you do, you're going to get this kind of myopic view. I think H.B. Gary is a good example of this, stretch up old painful things from our past. H.B. Gary had someone write a web server for them from the ground up because they didn't want a bunch of vulnerabilities. So they brought in a friend that they thought was really, really good at what they did. And bringing in that echo chamber and just bringing in your friends all the time, that can actually burn you very, very, very bad. And this goes back to an overall business thing too. Paul, we've talked about this a lot. Hiring really, really good friends doesn't always work out real well.
Yep.
Especially if you're just hiring a group of people and they're excited to be working with Apple and they don't want to necessarily make someone in senior management mad. Yeah, they might actually pull their punches a little bit. Whereas if you have an anonymous bug bounty program, the person that finds that vulnerability doesn't care. Mm-hmm. They want to get paid at the end of the day, and they're not going to kiss your ass just simply because they know you personally. And I think that's probably another advantage of a bug bounty program.
Yep.
Let me ask a different question. It's not a well-formed thought on my part. It's much more of a question, but we always look at this concept of authorized use, and I don't want to stretch this into like a CFAA or anything else around it, but when you do a bug bounty program, is there a risk of inviting stuff into your environment that you didn't want? I mean, I see some people say, well, we're going to define the scope and the parameters, I want it to be this. But are they at some level, by essentially opening up and doing stuff on Spec, does that increase risk? Or is that just a misguided thought on my part and I should just go take the weekend off?
I think it could, but I think that if a good example of this is an IoT manufacturer will put out a bug bounty and say, hey, look, you can look at our firmware all you want, but like our main website and the cloud website, like that's off limits. Or they select certain websites that maybe are in play, like the server and the server farm that does the API calls to that device. Yeah. Maybe that is in scope, but this other stuff isn't. I don't think there's any more or less risk of someone trying to break into your other stuff that you've put out of scope just because you have a bug bounty. I mean, it may pique someone's interest, but I think for the most part, people participating in bug bounty programs, hey, they want to get paid and they want to play within the rules so that they can get paid. They don't want to be the person that says, hey, I found a firmware vulnerability, and by the way, I attacked this other thing that was out of scope, because that's going to ruin their credibility in the bug bounty world.
I think that's true, but I do know that there is, just working and teaching hacking classes and pen testing classes for years, it is very, 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 very hard for people that are in the offensive community, right, to stop. Mm-hmm. Even people that do this legitimately, a lot of times, talking with my testers, they're like, wow, this looks really bad over there. I'm like, don't touch that. But that looks really bad over there. Don't touch that. Mm-hmm. And I do not know yet if there's any hard numbers or any anecdotal evidence whatsoever that says that this problem is more of a problem or less of a problem in the bug bounty community at all. But all those things you just said, Michael, were the exact same issues that we were dealing with 8 to 10 years ago with pen testing. It's like, well, you're inviting these people in. Who's to say that they're not going to do something really bad? How can we trust them? And I would like to be very altruistic and say that we should give the bug bounty program the same type of leeway and the same type of trust that we give pen testing firms, at least at the start, before we actually have this risk confirmed or denied in one way or the other.
I think it's a great point. Yeah, because we find, right, I mean, again, I look at it economically, it's a market. And that means that the market still has to be made. And we have to define the players. We have to understand the supply and the demand of it, and it has to work itself out, because we still see incredulity at, they're paying. Well, to your point, they're giving us T-shirts. They're giving us miles. They're actually paying out, and they paid out $50,000 or $100,000, and this group doesn't have the kind of capitalization to do that. I think there's a marketplace for it, because the other thing too that I see, I mean, you mentioned the CVE stuff. Pareto principle here has to play, and there's some extensions to it too. It's not always an 80-20 rule. There's probably like 1% of things that really, if you're focused on those, these are a higher problem, and we got to figure it out. Now, are they the same 1% for everybody? No. Are they that far apart also? No. So, I mean, like, that's for me, that's what I'd like to see. Like, I'd like to start seeing like average time spent, average payout. What does that work out to? How does it work out? And then, to your point, John, yeah, let's go figure out if there's actual problems. I'm willing to bet we can deal with them. And if they're not, cool, then there's no problem to it. And we can encourage more people to do it. Now, are we seeing that? I mean, I know I see HackerOne and others, like they're publishing reports, they're putting information out there. Is this helpful? Are we liking the transparency that we're getting in the marketplace around it? Or at least what we have of a marketplace so far?
A lot of the customers that we've talked to, because once again, we do recommend our customers seriously look into bug bounty programs. Once again, I know that's weird for a pen testing firm. It seems like we're slicing our throat. But in all honesty, so far, these programs have been ran with a high level of professionalism. And now I know that these companies like HackerOne and BugCrowd and a lot of them, they're putting a tremendous amount of effort of doing the filtering of the communication between the researcher and the customer to make sure that that product stays professional all the way through, because they know that that reputation is on them. So far from what I'm seeing for people that have implemented it, they get a lot of crap stuff, but they get some really good nuggets. And some of it is very, very, very impressive. So far, just from what I've seen, just from my anecdotal evidence, it seems like a lot of people are really happy, especially with the big shops.
Awesome. Well,
yeah, that is awesome.
Michael and John, thank you very much for appearing on the show today and talking about this topic. It was awesome. And that concludes this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. See everyone next time.